Hey guys, Chris Durry here. Today I'm going to take you through all the 2020 AFL draft picks, and I'll be talking about their Supercoach and AFL Fantasy relevance both for this coming year and into the future. Going through some projections, when I think they'll roughly get some opportunities, so there's some of the things to look forward to.
So to start us off, we've got Jamarra. So when do I think he'll play? I think he's going to be a pretty early starter. Could be a chance for round one. So my thinking is I think he should probably partner with Aaron Nawson for the Dogs. As I guess you could even have him as the number one option close to goal, and you can have Nawson play a bit higher to utilise his elite endurance and marking. So, that's probably what I'd be looking at. And look, I'd probably say round one, he should be in the mix. But would I pick him for Supercoach, AFL Fantasy? It's a no for me, at least this year. Maybe in the future, it could be possible. And I think he could average a goal a game this year. I think that's a realistic outcome, possibly even a nudge a bit higher than that. But realistic sort of scoring output, I'd be looking at something like a 55 Supercoach, 50 in AFL Fantasy, so probably pretty stock standard for a first year key forward. But yeah, you can't realistically, as a key forward in the first year, expect too much. And Riley Thilthorpe, well, I'd be looking at him as someone where, could he play early for Adelaide? I think there's a chance where I think they really need to start introducing youth. So could he play round one? Look, if he's healthy, right to go, had a good pre-season, I think he's another chance, and he'd be pretty suitable in my view as sort of a key forward who can play some relieving ruck minutes just to, I guess, give O'Brien a breather where needed. So that's probably the role I'd be looking for him to play. Whether Adelaide do that, I don't know the answer at this point. But look, again, I'd probably be saying possibly pretty similar output to a Jamarra, where it could be a 55 Supercoach, 50 in AFL Fantasy. And more so, he can maintain that sort of similar average because he'll be up the ground a little bit more versus Jamarra, who I think he really needs to play close to goal. That's where, as a junior, certainly he's done all his best work as I've touted him, the most dangerous inside 50 target that I've seen in my days watching the juniors. So number 3, so Will Phillips. So he's someone where out of everyone in the draft, I'd be saying lock and load this guy. My personal projection, he's a round one starter for North Melbourne. He's probably that third midfielder for me, where I guess you've got Cunnington as that number one ball winner. Then you've got, I'd say probably Simpkin as that sort of, I guess, X-factor guy in there, or that next best mid. But I'd have Phillips as probably that number 3, maybe just ahead of a Luke Davies-Uniacke, where I feel like he can probably be an 85 Supercoach, 80 AFL Fantasy, should play the whole season. So probably not quite the Matt Rao numbers that we saw from that small sample size, but possibly something around that, I guess, Sam Walsh level production. First up, I'd be anticipating of a Phillips. Could be a touch better, but he's someone that definitely is a pretty safe starter. So start him on your field. I think that's a safe bet. So next up, number 4, Logan McDonald. So for Sydney, can he play early? Well, he's got Buddy and Sam Reid as sort of those two key forwards. It depends on Buddy's health. Will he even get back? Well, we don't know the answer to that. But even with those two guys, if I was Sydney, I'd personally be picking Logan from really round one, assuming his pre-season goes well and he's looking right to go. But again, he could be that 55 Supercoach, 50 AFL Fantasy. Would I get him? No, to be real. But I do think he'll have a terrific career. And really with all these key forwards, you're looking at them sort of as a year 4 breakout sort of year. Could be year 3 with some of them. So that's usually the general time frame. Whereas with a midfielder like a Will Phillips, well, year 1, he can just get the job done. Where at the same age, he was getting pretty similar numbers, if not maybe even a nudge better than the likes of a Matt Rao, Noah Anderson. But without games this year, it's just too hard to know where he fits. But I think he'll be sort of that in-between production where it could be more like those Sam Walsh numbers, maybe plus a little bit on the contested side. But next up, so I've got Braeden Campbell for Sydney. So he's someone where very versatile. You can play him anywhere. So where they play him, who knows? Could be inside, outside, forward, back. He hasn't played much back that I've seen, but I would actually probably be using him in defence as that, I guess, rebounder where he's got the skills, he's got the run. In terms of production, he's not a huge sort of accumulator, but very damaging. So just with that kick in particular, just phenomenal, has the burst of speed, but he's really that, I guess, qualitative guy. So, sort of production and chances to play early. Could he play round 1? Could be in the mix. Don't lock him in yet. See how he goes during sort of pre-season games and see how all the training reports suggest sort of his place in the team is. But he's someone where, look, they could possibly slot him in. Most likely, I'd say probably in year 1 more as a forward, who maybe he could rotate into the midfield for a few minutes here and there. But in terms of likely production, could be you could call it a 60 Supercoach, 60 AFL Fantasy. So could score reasonably, but I don't think he'll get up to that high mark. So he's one for consideration. So put him on your watch list to see how he goes. Denver Grainger-Barras, so here we're looking at a skinny key defender. I think he'll take a bit of time. Maybe we see him this year, but I don't necessarily think it'll definitely be as a regular. And if it is, well, I think he'll probably be more of a shut-down-ish third tall. Maybe intercepts a bit, but again, is that sort of, you could call him a 50 Supercoach, 50 AFL Fantasy, so probably not someone I'd be getting, to be realistic, unless you're really struggling for guys who can play in defence or get opportunities. But Elijah Hollands for Gold Coast, so bargain at this get. Really high impact per possession player, but of course coming off the major injury. So he's someone where I'd be looking more, the year 2 breakout would be the more realistic scenario with Elijah, but he can definitely play this year, assuming health permitting, is in good condition, is right to go. Realistic production this year, I wouldn't get my hopes up too high. It could be, it could be a 60 Supercoach, 60 AFL Fantasy type, where he'll probably mostly play forward would be my expectation, but he can sort of push up on a wing, maybe through the midfield a little bit. So that's sort of more the role to watch for that. So he's someone to have on your watch list, but as with a Campbell, just watch him, but not a definite starter. And for me, I probably won't be starting either, to be realistic, because when you're using those early picks, well, they're going to be a lot more costly in your fantasy football teams. So they're probably no's, but watch them. So Nik Cox is tall as a project. He's your 199 centimetre, tall utility, good skills. Likelihood to play early, I would say unlikely. Is someone where maybe we see him this year, but if we do, well, he's probably going to get you your 45 Supercoach or AFL Fantasy points, so he's not going to be viable this year. He's a project, he needs time. He's someone where you're really picking him for who will be in year, really probably 4, maybe year 3, but he could be anything, he could play anywhere. He's an intriguing player, but a project, so don't worry about Nik Cox this year. Archie Perkins, so he's a really impactful player. My thinking is he'll probably play forward this year, maybe push a little bit into the midfield, but he's more a forward to start his career. So can he play this year? It's possible, and I think he'll probably get his opportunities. Will he maintain his position? I'd say probably less likely than a Campbell or a Hollands, where he's probably not quite as advanced of an accumulator at this stage, and I'd expect his production to be a little below that mark. So he could be your probably 55 Supercoach, 55 AFL Fantasy if he does play, but here's someone where, again, I probably won't be picking, but look, you can have him on your watch list, because he's someone where he probably should get games at some point, but he's not necessarily guaranteed to hold his spot. So Zac Reid at pick 10, so again, a bit like a Cox is a long-term project, give him time, sort of your 202 centimetre key back, maybe future ruck, but I don't see him getting the opportunities this year, and if he does, he's not going to score much either. So don't worry about him this year, but 3 or 4 years time, who knows, but maybe if he's playing ruck, maybe that makes him viable. But I think Essendon have a pretty good young ruck there who should hold down that number 1 spot for a long time. So for Adelaide, pick 11, Luke Pedlar was an interesting selection and probably a bit of a surprise, but I think he's actually got scope to be a really good footballer. So he's had his shoulder issues, is someone where he hasn't played a lot of footy at recognised levels, a lot of school footy, but he's someone where he's got the tools to be, as I've described him, something like a bigger-bodied Toby Green, so he's someone to watch for future years. I don't think he'll necessarily get early games for Adelaide, but I wouldn't mind seeing him get a few opportunities. So maybe as someone who gets that chance, but in terms of likelihood to impact this year, is probably more of a forward initially. Maybe he gets some sort of brief midfield minutes, but I don't think that'll be his primary role. So production could be something like your, 55 Supercoach, 50 AFL Fantasy. Give him a few years and he can become a good player, assuming health permitting. So Tanner Bruhn, so he's someone where really good midfielder, but the problem, of course, with GWS is, will there be opportunities? And if the likes of a Tom Green isn't getting his regular chances for a GWS, well, I'd be suggesting that's pretty unlikely that he'll be getting those chances. So if he was to play and he was to actually play midfield, well, he could be something like I could call him a 65 Supercoach, 60 AFL Fantasy, but just job security would be the issue. Let's say he gets a couple of games, will he get a third game, will he get a fourth game? That'd be the problem. So, he isn't someone I'd be picking this year, but he could be someone in the future who could be a good midfielder. So I guess watch him in that regard. So Tom Powell, so he's someone in the SA under-18s where he averaged about 35 disposals per game. So he's someone where you should definitely have on your watch list. The problem with North Melbourne is that, well, their midfield is actually quite deep. They might not be a strong team at the moment, but they do have a good number of good midfielders. So how much opportunity he gets, well, that's a bit of a question mark. But he's someone I would like to see certainly get an extended stretch of games, if not become a regular by season's end. So he's definitely someone to watch. What could be his possible production? I don't know, probably 75 Supercoach, 70 AFL Fantasy, maybe a 70 Supercoach, 65 AFL Fantasy. Could be something in those sorts of regions. So he's someone where he can definitely score and be one of the better scorers in this draft. So it'll really just come down to opportunity. But yeah, if he gets those chances and he developed a lot last year, well, yeah, he's definitely got a chance for North Melbourne to get those games and maybe even earn a permanent spot. So have him very firmly on your watch list for this year, because high production, but also a really good footballer. So next up, so Heath Chapman, so tallish defender, but can play sort of as your sort of Grant Birchall rebounding interceptor. So, he's someone where he could possibly play next year and could actually score reasonably. So, although as a taller type, don't dismiss him right away. He's someone that I'll sort of slightly have on my watch list. Look, he'll probably be a bit too expensive again, being that first round pick. But what could he average? He could be something like it could be 55 Supercoach, 50 AFL Fantasy, maybe even edge up to that sort of 60 Supercoach, 55 AFL Fantasy. So he could be okay and maybe even holds his spot. So once he gets in. But will he be around one starter? Look, unlikely, but we might see him this year. So be watchful because he might get those chances. So Conor Stone, so will he get games? Probably unlikely. He'll be picked. He's been picked as a forward for GWS. So unless their forward line is really bleeding options, I don't think he's likely to get games this year, honestly. But yeah, who knows? In terms of likely production, if we do see him, I don't think he'll be a high scorer. He's a low sort of production guy, even in the NAB league. So he was around that sort of 10 disposal mark. He'd kick 1.5 goals a game. His first game, his debut game, was 5 goals, and then after that it was sort of a goal a game average. So he could be it could be a 40 Supercoach, 40 AFL Fantasy. So he's not someone I'm considering this year, to be realistic at this stage, unless he's suddenly improved out of nowhere. But yeah, that's the thing, we don't know with the Victorians as well, where Conor Stone, NAB League, well, there was no NAB League this year, so we just don't know how much a lot of these guys have improved. So that's sort of the margin of error there. But yeah, realistically, based on what I saw in 2019, I just don't think we'll necessarily see him, or if we do, it won't be high scoring sort of fantasy stuff. So Lachlan Jones for Port Adelaide, so he's one of the most immediate, ready to go guys. You could start him round one in a back pocket. He'll play really good footy, future midfielder. So high contested possession, has the long penetrating damaging kick, good athlete. So he's got a lot of tools, and he's someone who definitely could play for Port Adelaide this year and could even be a round one starter and hold down his place. But the problem for Port Adelaide is this: they've got a really good mix of general defenders, arguably even the best in the competition. So will he get those opportunities is the question. So But definite watch list, but just job security based on the quality of Port Adelaide's defence is a question. But in terms of immediacy of game, well, after Will Phillips, well, Jones might even be that next guy. So if he does get opportunities, well, he's someone to definitely look at if you think he can hold his place. And he's someone where, again, definitely firmly on my watch list. So definitely highlight Lachlan Jones. So next up, Oliver Henry. So he's someone where he can play as sort of a medium forward, medium back. He could play at either end. Collingwood's forward line's decimated, so we might actually see him play this year. And look, he could get a goal a game maybe, but even if he does play, will he be a high scorer? No. He's sort of that sort of 10, maybe 11, 12 disposal a game type in the juniors. So is that going to translate at AFL level? Well, probably not to anything particularly high. So in terms of projection for scoring, could be something like it could be 40 to 45 in your Supercoach AFL Fantasy. I'll give him 45. I think he could probably do that if he gets games, but I won't be picking him unless he's super cheap for whatever reason. So, and I haven't seen any of the pricings yet. So, Henry would have to be really low priced to really be open to him, because I don't think he'll necessarily rise enough in price. I think there'll be cheaper guys who would rise more and score more. So Ryan Angwin, so he's someone where very much a project, very light, not much of a ball winner. I can't imagine we'll see him this year. He's mostly a midfielder. You could possibly see him forward or back, but what would he score if he plays is sort of your 40 to 45 points per game scorer in both formats, so I'm not interested this year. He really needs time to develop as a project. Year 2, year 3, that's when we'll probably maybe have him sort of come up maybe as an emergency, maybe get some consideration for games, but he's someone who will take time, to be real with you. So Finlay Macrae, so he's someone where Collingwood could possibly play him. I've made the comment before that at the same age and stage where, as an underager, well, Finlay was more advanced than sort of Jack was at that stage, where Jack's progression was very much, I guess, in the middle portion of his draft year. That's when he came good, and then he really became fantastic. Whereas with the Finlay, he's a lot more advanced at the same age. As an underager, well, he was sort of a pretty sure first rounder, and just already playing that sort of high production game, can play inside outside, was forced to play a lot of cross half forward for Oakley just because you had the likes of Raoul, Anderson, Phillips in that midfield, so it was hard for him to get necessarily those high numbers that those guys were, but you put him inside, put him on a wing, and he was definitely finding a heap of it and playing good football. So maybe for Collingwood, maybe he can play a little bit half forward wing, maybe some inside minutes, but probably not initially. And what could he average if he does get chances? He could become a regular, earn a string of games, so put him on your watch list. He could be something like a 60 to 65 Supercoach. Could be about the same in AFL Fantasy. If he plays more mid, maybe if he plays forward, maybe it's subtract 5 or subtract 10. So that's a sort of thing you could look at. But yeah, I could see him playing at least a string of games. So, but it just depends on whether Collingwood want to play some more youth this year. Where last year they were very, very hesitant to play some of the young guys. The first year players was only really Rusco that got the opportunity, and some of the others probably could have got more chances, so that's something to be slightly cautious with. But he's someone where certainly as a Collingwood fan I would hope to see him play, where just Collingwood's in that transition phase where they really need to start playing more young players because their window is realistically shut with the, I guess, older group that they've got currently, so they really do need to introduce that youth, and I'd be really hoping that we start to see a bit more of that this year. So yeah, hopefully we get to see Finlay for a good stretch. But yeah, again, that sort of, he could be probably your 60 in both formats, something like that. So yeah, he's someone to watch. Max Holmes, for me, is a project. He only played one NAB League game, was all right in that game, but yeah, it's just he's coming from, I guess, an athletics background, hasn't played a lot of footy at recognised levels, so I can't see Geelong giving him any chances. If we saw him, he'd get you 45 in both formats, so yeah, don't worry about him this year. He's someone where Geelong have drafted him for who he might be in 3 or 4 years, as that sort of, I guess, outside runner type. So Jake Bowie, so we could see him this year, and same with Bailey Laurie, where they're both smalls. They could play forward, could play a little bit outside mid, both bring a bit of class, good movers, so Yeah, we could see either or both of them. We could see him for stretches of games, so consider both of these guys. If anything, I'd probably say Bailey Laurie is the more advanced, the more likely to play, and he's probably more the forward of the two, so yeah, if one of them was to play, probably he'd be the guy. So, but yeah, watch them both. We could see him for a stretch of games. Do they hold their place? We'll just have to see how Melbourne's best 22 falls into place. But yeah, watch them both. Reef McInnes, so we're looking at a really tall mid, tall utility, whereas you're 193, but he's going to take time to develop. We might not even see him this year. If we do, might just be for a brief stretch of games, and I wouldn't be expecting huge production either. So, although he's someone where I think I had him something like 8th in my power rankings, well, he's someone where you're drafting him for who he'll be in sort of your 3-4 years' time. Because he's someone who is developing quickly, but has still quite a lot of development to go. And where would he play? Well, if he does play, it's probably more as a maybe forward back at this stage. Could play a little bit of mid with Collingwood having a few vacancies in there, but yeah, look, I don't think he'll score that much. If he did play, he might be something like a 50 in both formats, so if that. So yeah, it could be 45 to 50, so I wouldn't be expecting too much from him this year. Blake Coleman, so I believe he's a bit more advanced, or my personal opinion is that he's a bit more advanced than his brother at the same age, and he can play pretty much the same role. He can be that sort of pressure forward, bring a bit of energy, be good at ground levels, so he gives you those sort of options. So look, it's possible we see him play this year, but there is quite a lot of pressure for spots where we've got his brother, we've got Charlie Cameron, Rayner's a good forward, maybe he plays a bit more mid, so Brisbane have the options, so we might not necessarily see him this year, and if we do, maybe it's for a few games, but yeah, it's just hard just from a job security perspective to see him getting those chances. If he plays, is that probably, I don't know, it could be a 45 in each format, so I wouldn't be expecting much from him this year anyway, but yeah, but he's still got that immediate enough game where he can play quite early. Even though Brisbane are a good team, it is realistic if there's injuries where he could play and actually go pretty well and look good in that sort of small forward role, so be watchful of that. But yeah, so next, Brayden Cook, so he's someone where he was taken a bit lower than I thought he might, and he's a late bloomer, so I wouldn't be expecting too much. I don't think he'll necessarily play year one, though it's possible that he could, and if he has a big pre-season, if he grows a few more centimetres, well, who knows what could happen. But yeah, most likely he starts probably as a medium forward, could probably end up more as a wing in the future, so he's someone to watch probably for a few years' time. Look, you can have him on your watch list, but I just think probably early season at least we're not going to see him. Maybe late season he gets a few, but yeah, it won't be early. What could he average? Probably, being realistic, probably your 45 to 50 in both formats. So you can't expect much early days just because he is that sort of later developer. So yeah, Matthew Allison, I've never heard the McLeod part, but yeah, so he's someone where I'd be looking at him as, I guess, a long-term key forward, sort of an undersized one at that, but yeah, he'll take time. We won't see him this year, I can't imagine, so give him sort of those 3-4 years to develop, and then maybe he's sort of able enough. But yeah, I can't see him sort of being a realistic option this year. I wouldn't have thought. So yeah, I wouldn't be considering him. If he did play, well, you're looking in your, I don't know, 35 to 40 territory in both formats. So I don't think you're getting much out of him this year. So Nathan O'Driscoll. So yeah, look, he's a sort of tall mid, can play sort of across halfback as well. He can play inside outside, so it's possible we see him, but just his sort of decision making sort of makes me think we might not necessarily see him this year either. But sort of fairly physically advanced, plays an aggressive game. So yeah, look, we might see him. We might see him for a stretch. Whether he holds his place, we'll have to see. But if he plays, what could he average? He could be something like your, I don't know, it could be a 55 Supercoach, 50 AFL Fantasy, depending on his role. But that's the sort of thing to look at. So yeah, have him on your watch list. He could possibly get some chances. So at 28, so here's one of my favourites in Sam Berry. So he's someone where he's a really good mid, and we could even possibly see him a little bit forward too. So he's someone where he played alongside the likes of Caleb Sarong, Sam Flanders, and he can really play as a high volume ball winner, wins a high percentage contested. So he's got all that, strong tackler. So yeah, and had he played this year, well, maybe we'd have seen him go earlier in the draft. So I think he's a good pick for Adelaide, and I wouldn't be surprised if he becomes a best 22 player. So watch for that. Might not be round 1 necessarily, but maybe by the end of the season, that wouldn't surprise me, honestly. So I'd be looking at him as something like I don't know, it could be a 65 Supercoach, 60 AFL Fantasy this year. So yeah, watch him. Have him on your watch list. He could be a pick, and he could be someone who could possibly hold his spot for Adelaide once he gets an opportunity. So yeah, I don't mind him. He's in my consideration list, and quite a strong one at that. So you've got Seamus Mitchell, so I don't think he's realistically going to play next year. He's a mostly forward, high impact per possession, doesn't find a lot of it. So if he did play for whatever reason and Hawthorn was struggling, he's probably your, I don't know, could be a 40 to 45 scorer in both formats. So yeah, you don't need to consider him this year. He's not realistically going to be much. But yeah, he's sort of your forward, maybe pushes up on a wing, has the speed, sort of penetrating kick, but yeah, he's just not enough of a ball winner or accumulator for that matter to be a consideration for fantasy. So at 30, Caleb Poulter. So Collingwood do have those midfield vacancies, but with a Poulter, I'm looking at him probably, although he's a tall mid, and I think as a result he's going to take time, he just lacks that, I guess, aggression towards winning the ball for me. So I don't think we'll see him this year. If we did, he's probably your, I don't know, it could be a 50 Supercoach, 50 AFL Fantasy. If it's as a mid, if it's as a forward, it's probably more your 45 in both formats. And he's someone where I'd probably, if he does play, it's probably more across half forward initially, maybe pushing through the midfield a bit as that sort of tall, high marking forward. So that's sort of the role that I'd be foreseeing. Liam McMahon, again, key forward or key position player, wherever Collingwood want to play him. But yeah, he's a project. He'll take your 3 to 4 years. We won't be seeing him this year. Errol Gulden, put him on your watch list. High production, can play. He's more of a forward, outside, mid. That's sort of the role you're expecting, but he can rack it up. He can find a lot of the footy. So, but just very uncontested is the problem there. So how he translates, don't know. Could we see him? We could. He's someone where maybe he gets a stretch of games, maybe even holds his spot, and we could see him early. So we need to watch for that. And because he is that smaller type as well as that sort of 175-ish, around that sort of range. So what could he average? He could average even 60, 65 in both formats. So he's one to look at. And he's got that potential to hold his spot as well, which not a lot of these guys in this draft do, to be realistic. So yeah, watch list for Gulden. Shannon Neale, Ruckman, he's going to take time. He's got the sort of aerobic base. He's got some tools to become a good player in the future, but he's going to take time. So yeah, he's not going to play this year, to be real. So give him your 4 years plus development, and maybe we get to see him. Fraser Rosman, he's very athletic, can play sort of key position outside, but he just can't find the footy. So not fantasy relevant, can't see him playing for a number of years. He's a project. So he's someone where he's been picked based on his athleticism, but he needs to improve as a footballer first before we see any of him at all. So yeah, he's sort of wait 4 years and see what happens, basically. Yeah, Connor Downey for Hawthorn. So he's someone we could see this year. So put him on your watch list. So if we compare a Downey to Hawthorn's previous pick in Seamus Mitchell, well, they play a similar game, but Downey gets double the numbers. So we're looking at a 10 possession per game versus a really 20 possession per game type, where they both have the damaging kicks, they both really have the acceleration and really good movement. But yeah, and with a Downey, look, you're looking at him as a sort of, I guess, damaging wing. So he's been drafted really as, I guess, an Isaac Smith sort of replacement if you're looking at, well, what's his future role going to look like. So we could see him possibly this year, and if we do, maybe it's even for a stretch. Maybe he holds his spot. We'll have to see how that goes. But yeah, he does sort of probably lack that contested side at this age, unless, of course, being a NAB League guy, since we haven't seen him this year, maybe he's improved that side of his game. But yeah, he's someone definitely have on your watch list. What could he average? He could be something like a 55 in both formats possibly. So he's someone where he could be okay. He could be a reasonable pick. So we've got Charlie. So he's someone where very high production mid. Bookmark him. He's someone where we could see him this year, and if we do, he can rack it up. And it'll be interesting to see what role he gets if he does get chances, because again, as I've mentioned before, North Melbourne have a good number of decent midfielders. So it's there's reasonable competition for spots. It's not just going to be a spot that's going to be awarded based on, I guess, being a pick from this year and North wanting to go for youth. He might not get those opportunities. And look, if someone wears a ball winner, he'll find a lot of it, high percentage contested, athletically has all the tools where he's got the speed, the endurance, the agility. So you've got all those sort of capabilities with him. Is he that damaging, or is he that good of a ball user? He's okay, but not high end in those regards. But in terms of production, look, he was only probably about 3 disposals off a Phillips. So you do have to be mindful of that. Where look, if he does get those chances as a midfielder, he could rack it up. So yeah, do be mindful of really all 3 of those first North Melbourne picks, where they could be among those really highest scorers. But what could his role be? I wouldn't be shocked if North Melbourne used him as possibly maybe as a defensive forward, maybe as a tagger. You could even possibly see those chances. But if he's played as a ball winner, obviously that's when he's going to score well. But yeah, put him on your watch list. And depending on role, what could he rack up? He could be something like a 65 Supercoach, 60 AFL Fantasy, to give you a rough estimate, if he's allowed to, I guess, be through the midfield. If he's more of a defensive forward, well, you're not going to get that. So you might get, 45, 50 in both formats. So, it just depends how he's used, if he's used at all. But yeah, watch list him. He could be a decent piece for North Melbourne. And if he doesn't get to play this year, well, maybe watch him for 2022. So Corey Durden, Carlton, so he's an immediate forward. He's someone where even going back to 2019, he was playing Sandful League as a forward. So he's viable to play next year. Does he have much scope to improve? That's sort of what I query with him. But he's someone where, look, you might get to see him this year. And if we do see him, well, he might actually get extended opportunities and could even hold his spot. So yeah, strongly consider Durden. He's someone where you need to watch him. What would his production be like? He could be a, 45 in both formats, maybe a 50, because he's going to be that small crumbing forward, so you're not going to get much in the way of production there. So, but yeah, he's got that chance to play games, have some job security potentially, because I don't see much in the way of Carlton's forwards. Eddie Betts is aged, so he's not really who he was anymore. And then aside from him, well, there's not that much in terms of your small forwards for Carlton. You've got a Jack Martin, who is good, but yeah, Carlton probably do need those other numbers in terms of small forwards. So Durden could be a chance. So yeah, watch him. Watch list him. And James Rowe. So here's a guy where I'll probably be starting him in my teams to start the year. So yeah, definitely bookmark him. So most advanced small forward in the draft, mature ager. I think from memory he led the Sandful in goals kicked this year, and by a decent margin. He's a really high-end crumbing forward. High scoreboard impact, that's what you can expect from him. Doesn't quite bring the forward pressure, so he could get dropped based on that. So that's the query with him. But in terms of, I guess, the offensive side, well, he can really do some damage and hit the scoreboard. So he's a piece for Adelaide, and I don't see a great sort of crumbing forward for Adelaide. So for me, he's a round 1 starter. What could he average? Could be around 55 in both formats. So probably not huge numbers, but you don't get huge numbers from small forwards ordinarily. Could bump up to 60 depending on, I guess, how much, volume of ball comes to the Adelaide front half. But yeah. Look, I'm probably starting him. So yeah, look at him. He's definitely someone you need to certainly consider, if not start. So Josh Iyer, he's someone for Essendon where project, give him time, he needs 4 years to develop. He's had his injuries. Apparently his development's been really good this year. Both he's grown in terms of height, but he's also gotten stronger, more athletic. The signs are there that he's progressing and he's developing. So there's a bit of promise with that selection for Essendon there in those regards, but he's a project. Give him time. He's that sort of tall key forward, so at that sort of 197, maybe 198. So just give him time. You won't see him this year. I can't imagine Essendon would really have to struggle to be playing him this year. So I just don't think that's realistic. If we saw him, he's going to get your 35 to 40 in either format. So yeah, don't worry about him this year. Samson Ryan. So it's hard to see him playing next year for Richmond unless it's as an injury replacement. He's still a pretty raw ruckman, but look, he's someone where he's developing. So at least he's trending in the right direction, but he's still youngish, so he's probably, I'd have to look up his age and date of birth, but he'd be around a sort of 20, 21-year-old, and he's been showing some signs in Queensland where, look, maybe he could be a ruckman, but yeah, probably not this year. So probably give him, I don't know, probably 2 years to develop, and then maybe he can give some competition for spots. But realistically, with Richmond's current ruck stocks, it'll be hard for him to get spots. He's really been drafted as a depth ruck to, I guess, put more pressure on for spots, but yeah. So he's just an injury replacement. So could be an able injury replacement this year, so you can watch him in that regard. But if he plays, what's he going to average? Well, given he'd be playing ruck and pretty exclusively ruck, I would have thought, even though he can take a mark and maybe push forward, but given Richmond's options, well, you wouldn't use him in that role given they've already got Lynch, they've got Rewalt and the like. Well, I'd probably be saying maybe he could be your, I don't know, it could be 55 Supercoach, 50 AFL Fantasy. Maybe given it's ruck, maybe I'm being a bit harsh. Maybe it could be a 60 Supercoach, 55 AFL Fantasy. But yeah, I think he's really a project. He needs time, so just look at him as an injury replacement if Richmond really get into trouble for their ruck stocks. But yeah, I think they've got guys in front of him. Like, even they could put in the likes of a Chol if they need to, or a Callum Coleman-Jones. So I wouldn't be expecting to see Ryan this year, to be realistic. So he's someone I'm not all that firm on. Jack Carroll, good mid, went a lot later than he should have. So I think Carlton have got a good one here. Do we see him this year? Maybe there's a vacancy in Carlton's midfield, so you could watch out. And maybe he gets a few games, but he's someone where he's a later bloomer. I think probably more year 2, year 3 is when he comes good. But yeah, look, you can watch him anyway. If he gets a game, maybe he can hold his spot. We'll have to see how his form is. But he's someone where I think he can become a good player in the long run through the midfield. So yeah, he can be a piece, but yeah, again, this year, probably not. What could he average? If he plays this year, maybe as a, I don't know, it could be a 55 to 60 Supercoach, probably about 5 less in AFL Fantasy, that sort of range. Wins a good percentage contested, able ball user, so really classy. So yeah, he's someone to watch. He can be a good piece in time. So Phoenix Spicer, so North Melbourne really went with speed here. There's no one, in my view, quicker with ball in hand in this draft than Spicer, be it in terms of like speed, agility, just runs around guys like they're traffic cones, but very small. Role he realistically has to play is probably as that sort of small pressure crumbing forward. He's got the instincts at ground level where maybe that's possible, but yeah, still very lightweight, still has a lot of refinement to go with his game. We could possibly see him this year, given North Melbourne don't have sort of that great crumbing forward, that pressure forward. I know they traded for a Atu Bozavanagi, but he's someone where, again, he's still pretty raw as well. So, I don't know, Spicer would be just as much a chance as Atu would be for games. So, that's something to watch. If he played, what's he going to score? He's probably a 40 to 45 in both formats. So, yeah, I wouldn't be expecting huge scoring from him if he does play. But, it's possible he could. But, yeah, it's just I probably won't be picking him at least. But, yeah, he could be a possible long-term piece. Harry Sharp, great athlete, not a footballer yet. So, and Brisbane, strong team. It's going to be hard to give him an opportunity. So he's that athlete, has the endurance, has the speed, is an option on the outside. But I think unless there's drastic injury problems on the outside, I can't see us seeing him this year. What could he average if he did play? Probably a 40 to, he could be probably a 45 in both formats roughly, would be a rough feel. So yeah, I wouldn't be picking him. Beau McCreery, he's someone where I think he could get some opportunities, so bookmark him. So overager, he's someone I hadn't seen a lot of for in the Sandful for South Adelaide, where I've only seen sort of a couple of his games, and he was someone I wasn't all that aware of. I'd noticed him for his sort of pressure and speed, but I didn't really have much notes beyond that. But looking at his goal kicking, well, he's actually kicked a decent amount of goals. So, he's a viable guy. And with Collingwood's forward line, well, they don't have anything in the way of sort of ground level craft or forward pressure. It's really a lot of small and medium marking forwards. So, in terms of providing contrast, well, McCreery actually provides quite a good amount of contrast to Collingwood's forward line, which makes me think he could actually be a possible round 1 starter. So, bookmark him. If he has a good pre-season and if the signs are good early, I would not be surprised if we saw him get early opportunities and regular opportunities even. So, that's something to watch, and that's a sort of little bit of inside take there. But he's someone where I think he could be your, I don't think he'll be a high sort of scorer, but he could be your, 55 sort of in both formats. So he could score a little bit, and if he can maintain his spot, well, there's the potential for job security. Not many guys in this draft have the potential for job security, but McCreery's one where, look, maybe there is that query. So you've got Tom Highmore. So he's sort of your sort of tall, rebounding, intercepting defender. So the problem with St Kilda, though, they've just got so many good defenders in their team. They've got 2 teams worth of defenders there. So will he get opportunities? Well, I wish he didn't go to St Kilda because he might have a better chance elsewhere. But yeah, look, it's possible. He's someone with a pretty immediate game. He's been terrific in the NEAFL for a number of years, went across to the Sandful this year to South Adelaide and played some really good footy. So look, there is that chance. And again, he's that interceptor, rebounder. So he's got those capabilities as that sort of taller, probably 192, 193-ish defender. He's not a key. He's more that sort of, he could be a third tall, but he's more of just a rebounder, so an interceptor. So yeah, I'd be looking, what could his scoring be? If he does get opportunities, he could be probably it could be a 65 Supercoach, 60 AFL Fantasy. Could nudge a little bit higher than that, but I'll play it conservative in that estimate. But job security question mark, but he's someone, just because of, again, all those St Kilda options in defence. But yeah, look, maybe he's a realistic chance to get a spot and hold a spot. So definitely consider, and he's got that immediacy of games. So yeah, watch list Highmore, and he's someone a bit like a McQueary. I'm looking at possibly including him in my starting team. So yeah, watch him for sure. Tyler Brockman, so he's a project, but he's got a lot of capability and a lot of abilities. So he's that speedy, pressure forward, has ground level craft. There's a lot to his game where he could be a potential player. So he could be that, he's not Cyril, but he could be that sort of same role successor, or maybe take over from a Puopolo eventually. But will we see him this year? I think he's still got a bit of developing to do, so unlikely. If we do see him, look, he's that 40 to 45 in both formats. He won't score much at this stage, but yeah, give him a few years, he might come good. He's someone where I think he's a decent selection for Hawthorn at this stage, and he's sort of a type of role they could use since Puopolo's sort of done. So Nick Stevens, is sort of a good tall type off halfback. He could even possibly become a tall mid in the future, so they're things to watch. But look, Geelong are a good team. I don't think they need him this year. Give him a few years, maybe we see him, but it's just unlikely we see him right away. But look, he can win and find a fair bit of the ball, so I'm not going to dismiss him in that regard. Where, look, if he does play, he could be he could be a 55 Supercoach, 50 AFL Fantasy. He can actually find and win a fair bit of the ball, and he's an able enough user. So look, consider him. But it's just, well, you would consider him more in a few years' time, I should say. So I'm not going to take him this year, but if, say, in 2021, 2022, he gets a chance, yeah, look, consider him then. Watch him then. So Henry Smith, so again, we're looking at a ruckman. He'll take time. So strong mark, has that, but yeah, Brisbane don't need him for a few years, and he won't be ready for a few years. So yeah, 4 years onwards, maybe we get to see him, but yeah, he'll take time. Ollie Lord, he won't play this year at all. He's the least likely of all the picks pretty much to play this year. He's just so far behind. Like, he's someone where, although he's born, I think it's even 1st of January, well, it's just, he doesn't have the production on the board. So I don't know why Port Adelaide picked him. There's the, I guess, family heritage, but yeah, I just don't see it with him. I don't see why he was picked. So, harsh call, and hopefully he proves me wrong. I like being proved wrong from time to time, but yeah, it's just, for me, that was just a weird selection. And yeah, I think of really the key position as taken. He was the one I really queried the most, because he just doesn't have the production on the board. So, so he'll take 4 years. If he's playing, it's going to take him 4 years to come good. Brandon Walker, so I thought this was actually later than he probably should have been bid on, but yeah, off halfback is someone where he's got a lot of X factor, and I wouldn't be shocked if we saw him this year, but yeah, Fremantle's defence is starting to come together, so we're not necessarily going to see him. So yeah, maybe a chance to get a stretch of games, could hold his spot if he really comes together and really has a breakout year, but I'm not necessarily expecting to see too much of him if we do see him, just because Fremantle are right in defence. What am I thinking his scoring could be if he does play? He could be something like a 50 in both formats, so he's someone to be mindful of as a possible who could play, but because a lot of these other guys in this range, they just won't play this year realistically. But Walker's a possible. So look, you can be aware of him. He's someone be aware of and watch if he shows some signs in pre-season, because he does have X factor and does have a lot of talent. So Maurice Rioli Jr. So for me, he plays a lot like a Daniel Rioli, but he's just more raw. He's a little bit behind in his development, but he can become with time that similar player. Unlikely to see him this year just with how raw he is. If it is, it's for a couple of games. I can't see him becoming a regular with Richmond's strength of front half. So if he did play, he'd average probably 40. He's a good way off, but he needs a few years to develop. And with development, being that sort of high pressure forward just really brings the second and third efforts. He's got that capability to carve out that niche as a result of that, but it's probably going to be a few years before we see him, or certainly see the best of him. So Luke Edwards, he's someone where had a good year as an underager, didn't make that step up this year. So for those doing phantom drafts, be aware West Coast like taking guys who have good years as underagers and don't necessarily have that ultimate draft year that's all that strong. So and look, Edwards was decent this year. He was decent in the sandful. He's a good ball user, can win it a little bit, racks it up. Not a good athlete, but and he's taller than his brother, so son of Tyson, for those that aren't aware. But for West Coast, good team, hard to see him getting chances. He's most likely to play if he does across half-back. He can play a little bit mid, so he could play inside-outside possibly, but if he did play, could be a 50 in both formats realistically this year. So but I just don't see him playing. West Coast are a good team, they don't need him this year. Give him a few years if he does come through at all. Cody Brand, development project, doesn't find any of the ball. Very much just an athletic shutdown key defender. Can kick, good long kick, uses it well, but just doesn't find enough of it to really be a viable thought. He's not an interceptor, doesn't find the footy, doesn't win the footy. So he's a project. Probably if he did play, he'd be he could average 35. So I don't see him realistically getting chances this year. He's way off. Essendon do have better options, and they'll be playing the likes of Cox and Reid before they will Brand. So, Joel Weston, so high production, small mid, could play a little bit forward, though I've only really seen him as a mid. But great athlete, so you've got that with him, and uses it pretty well. He's got some capabilities with ball in hand, so he's someone to be aware of. Watch him. High production, we could see him for a stretch of games. Maybe he earns a regular spot. I'm skeptical at this stage if he will. He'd have to prove it, but being that small type, with those small sort of sub 180 types, be mindful. They've typically, if not almost always, got those more advanced games where they're pretty well most of the time year one ready. So and Weston's sort of another in that bracket where it's a bit like a Gulden, a bit like a Durden. They can all play pretty immediately, and Weston's got that pretty immediate game. So watch him. Have him on your watch list. What could he average if he does play? Could be a 55 in each format, so he can find it reasonably. He can find a bit of the ball, and he's good with it. So and he's got the athleticism. So there's a bit to him. Maybe we see him, and could be for a stretch. Job security will be interesting if he does get chances, but we could see him for a stretch of games. Maybe he becomes a regular, so watch him. Dominic, what am I thinking? So he's an athletic forward, has some tricks. He's not that ground level crummer, pressure guy. And it's just a case of the Bulldogs, they made a few bids, they couldn't get any of the guys that really fit their needs, but look, he's going to be someone where he's going to take a few years to develop. Probably not going to play this year realistically. If he did, he's probably your 40 to 45 sort of scorer in both formats. So, but I don't think he's likely to play. Bulldogs have enough forwards, or at least midfielders, that they'll be forced to play forward because they've got so many midfielders that it's basically they'll take up the forward line. So unlikely we see him. Eddie Ford, a lot of people say good value here, and I happen to actually agree that North Melbourne found some value here late. What am I thinking? So he's someone where he can play in any line of the ground, be it forward, back, midfield. This year, had the season gone ahead, he was wanting to play midfield. Do we see him this year? Look, it's possible. It's possible. And where he plays, that would be the question as well, where you can play him across any line. North Melbourne's midfield is probably alright, so they're probably going to start him, if he does get games, probably forward or back. What would he score? Again, depends on role, but he'll probably be a bit inconsistent early on. He was even inconsistent in the juniors, but he could be your 45 scorer in both formats. So, if he plays, don't expect too much from him this year, but yeah, I'm not necessarily expecting him to play, but he's a possible, so you can be aware of him in that much. Isiah Winder, or as some commentators are pronounced, Winder. So he's someone where big time talent, he can play, so watch him. Again, West Coast, good team. It's going to be hard to get games, but you can play him across really any part of the ground, and he's a damaging player. He's got the speed, he's got the capabilities with ball in hand, damaging, but he can win it as well. He's a good contested ball winner. So, there's a lot of capability there, and look, he could plausibly play, maybe get a stretch of games this year. If he does, maybe he averages 50, depends on where he plays, maybe a touch more if he's in the midfield, maybe it could be 55 in both formats, but it'll be interesting. He's someone where he's an interesting player. I know it's West Coast, but yeah, watch him. He's someone where he could possibly get a chance and maybe a stretch of games. So, and he's someone over the long run I think will be possibly an interesting player. A bit like I was saying about Walker. They're two where I'm seeing value late, and I think they could be really good pieces in the long run. So Fleeton, so he's someone where good general defender, can intercept, win his one-on-ones, able ball user, so he's alright. And look, GWS's defence is decimated, so look, it's not unrealistic to see him play this year. Whether it's this year, we'll have to wait and see, but yeah, look, he could possibly play. So yeah, watch him. If he does play, could be a 50 Supercoach, 45 AFL Fantasy, so he could do a little bit. He's someone where he's viable. He could get a stretch of games, possibly. So we'll have to wait and see. So Jacob Weir, late bloomer, good season in the Sandful. So good ball user. He's someone with capabilities. Could he play for GWS this year? Look, with Shaw, I guess, forced out. There's possibly a vacancy there. So we could see him play. If he does, it could be something around I'd call him probably a 60 in both formats, maybe, to be realistic. So, that's the sort of player. Job security, he's a possible. So he could get a stretch of games, could become a regular. So watch him. Have him on your watch list. He could become someone for GWS. If you've made it to the end, well, congratulations. Make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell for future updates, and let me know in the comment section below, would you like more Supercoach or AFL Fantasy content from future videos during this sort of, I guess, off-season period? I'd be interested to hear. If there is demand, maybe I will produce a few more videos for, I guess, the Supercoach and AFL Fantasy communities. So thanks, guys. If you like the video, give it a like, and yeah, see you in the next video.